Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Okay, good. Awesome. Well, yeah, no, really, I do appreciate you taking the time to be on. I know it's going to be helpful for a lot of people that follow us and who follow you. And I think it'll be a good way to get some good information out to people as far as what's going on in Fort Pierce, what they can look forward to, and who better to hear it from than you, right?
Oh, well, the whole commission, we're all sort of bully about Fort Pierce. Yeah.
You can tell that the vibes are high in Fort Pierce. There's a lot of excitement going on.
Yes.
And for people who, I mean, a lot of people know who you are, but for people who aren't familiar with your background, do you want to give them a quick breakdown of who you are? And I know you're a native of the area and how you ended up serving.
Sure. I was born in Fort Pierce and went to school all the way through Indian River Junior College, it was then, and graduated from junior college and then went to the University of Florida. And I graduated from there, and I was an English major, English and history. I was supposed to teach high school English, actually Shakespeare, but got diverted and ended up living and working in Chicago for the American Medical Association. And then I retired from the Illinois State Medical Society as their vice president of membership and marketing, and came back home to Fort Pierce and looked around for volunteer opportunities, started getting interested in the city's budget. And then people said, run for mayor because you know the budget. And I fell for that flattery and ran for mayor and won in the general election by 61 votes after a mandatory recount.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first election in 2012, and then have subsequently run. And at one time I was unopposed, and then the last two times I won over other opponents. So
right, and you just started
for another 4 years.
You're in your fourth term now, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Cool. Let me ask you, how have you seen Fort Pierce change over the years? I mean, not just, since you grew up in it, but also since you've been serving. What are some, you can say good and bad, but what are the ways that you've seen the city change in that time?
Since I've been serving, the city has become the next great thing on the Treasure Coast, right? It's always had potential, and we're getting very close to fulfilling that potential. We've gotten close before and didn't quite make it. Like when the recession in 2009 and 10, that set us back. And so now we're kind of on the brink again, and there's a new excitement about Fort Pierce. So let's just say that when I was first elected, a lot of downtown was not rented. The downtown was kind of trying to come back, but it was still a little bit iffy, and there were a lot of things that people weren't sure about because we'd been through this recession, and it had really hurt the city's budget badly. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first thing we had to tackle was we were $97 million in debt when I took over. And that's a huge debt for a city with our budget to deal with. So we had to get the debt under control. And that's one of the things we've done as a commission is reduce that debt, and so that you can use those monies for something else other than pay debt, right? So we are healthy. Our budget is healthy, but we are definitely not wealthy. So we do a lot with a little. We have probably the smallest budget for a city our size in Florida, one of the smallest. We have a $63 million general fund, and that is probably equals what Port St. Lucie pays for its police department. It's just we don't have the kind of money that other cities have. So I think we're on a sound financial footing, but we need a better tax base, and that's what we're working on now as a commission.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because I thought the same thing. I'm sure when it comes to comparing it to a larger city like Port St. Lucie, the budgets are obviously different. And I didn't think about that. In 2012, you came in towards, I mean, that's really when kind of the ashes of the recession were starting to pick up all over the country.
Right.
Right. What are some of the things that you look at now and you're like, wow, that was these developments or these changes or these policies really helped us either get out of that, or you see them today? Because I agree. I think Fort Pierce, it's been growing in such a positive direction for such a long time. And I'm interested to know from your perspective what you think the biggest catalysts were.
One of the things that's really helped us is our Fort Pierce Redevelopment Agency and spending the funds in what we call blighted areas. And so one of the things we did was put infrastructure in the whole port area, because that's in the FPRA area. And once we put the infrastructure in the port, then the county was able to attract an operator, director. And I don't know if you've seen the port lately, but you go by there and you see that giant hoist, which is the largest in North America, or was when it was assembled there, and all the mega yachts there. And you say, wow, because we put the infrastructure in, they were able to bring director to Fort Pierce. And now the whole port area, the property up there is very valuable. Property owners want to build on it, want to have businesses on it. And so that was a big catalyst. Something as unsexy as infrastructure, right? Also, the beach and A1A, we improved A1A with FPRA funds. And now we have thriving businesses around Jetty Park, like the Square Grouper and all the businesses that are lined there along A1A. The Jetty Park we bought with FPRA funds and improved. So we've got this park that is where the inlet meets the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a beautiful, beautiful park with a lot going on there, because you can fish off the jetties, you can sit in the swings, you can play chess, you can enjoy just sitting there quietly, and or you can learn about history when the Navy was here in World War II. So that is now a thriving business district. In fact, it's so thriving that we have a parking problem that we're trying to address. And because and when season is here, particularly, and on Saturdays and Sundays, if you've ever tried to get over South Bridge to get to our beaches, which are beautiful, you know that the traffic backs up. It's a very popular place. JC Park and Causeway Park and Jetty Park are all popular beaches that got discovered during COVID, because down south, they all closed their beaches, and then we did not. And so people came up from South Florida and discovered Fort Pierce and are still coming and putting in their boats in the water and fishing. And because one of the natural things that Fort Pierce has is this safe inlet, deep inlet, straight inlet, short inlet. Boat captains love it. Mm-hmm. And of course, Atlantic Ocean beaches, a lot of them, that you can go and that are not crowded and that are beautiful places to swim or just enjoy the water.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The inlet there, I know for a lot of my friends who are big into boating, if they talk about like the Jupiter Inlet, it's daunting, and even Stewart can be tough at times. And I know the Fort Pierce Inlet, that's been such a positive. And you're probably right. I mean, a lot of people.
And Sebastian.
Yes, Sebastian, right?
Yes. So compared to all of those, Fort Pierce is the safest, the shortest, and people. I'm not a boater, but I can even see that.
Right. What are I know you had mentioned parking, and you guys are starting to test out like the pay to park thing. Is that part of addressing the parking concern?
We've been approaching that slowly and studying that, trying to figure out if there's a way to avoid that, because it's not, people are not taking that well. But what has happened is that those three parks in particular, JC, Jetty, and Causeway Park, are so heavily used and used by a lot of people that don't pay taxes here. And so the maintenance alone on those parks requires almost 24/7 attention, even though the parks are not supposed to be open. Most Fort Pierce parks are supposed to close at dusk and open at dawn. But Jetty Park, because it's a fishing destination, needs to be a 24/7 park. The paid parking is our last resort of trying to figure out a way to protect those parks, because we're getting complaints from our own residents about the state of those parks, the state of the restrooms, so some of them not only need maintenance, but they need kind of brightening up and freshening up. And so we don't have that in our budget. So that was a last resort. And we're still working out the details, because we wanted not to charge local residents, but because the county has contracts with the federal government and they restrict what we can do in terms of treating people differently. We can't say, if you don't pay taxes in Fort Pierce, you have to pay. We have to treat everybody the same per those federal contracts. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? You had mentioned some of the revitalized areas, and I think it might be good to touch on King's Landing now, if you like, because that's in that general area as well. Yeah,
that's very recent news. Just this week, we sealed the deal with a new developer, and we're past the old developer who was not performing, and a new developer came in, Live Oak, and this is going to happen. And it's been a long time coming, and we did have some missteps. And this is a development downtown of about 7 acres. It's going to be mixed use. It's going to be a hotel, a Marriott Mainsail hotel, or actually it's Mainsail we're dealing with, but it's an autograph hotel, but it's a Marriott product. And condos and some retail and restaurants and parking. There's going to be some parking, a parking garage. And so it's back on, and this is really a big deal because it was on life support, and our commission saved it. And it wasn't easy to work our way through it's a very complex deal, and we had to work our way through it. And usually the commission itself isn't involved in a lot of the negotiations in detail, but at this particular deal, our commission was, because we all wanted to be reassured that we were doing the right thing. So right. I feel very good about King's Landing. And this afternoon, I'm going to a groundbreaking for the villas, which are right next to, they were never part of the original deal, but they were kind of an offshoot of the deal. And so there are going to be villas right along Bacchus Avenue, and they're already working on that. And people are excited to see that there's actually workers out there, and dirt's being turned, and things are happening. And so it's kind of a good sign.
Yeah. Anytime you see things moving, people get excited when you can see it starting to come to fruition.
It's really going to happen.
Yeah. And I know people were talking in our Facebook group about, I think it was KOA Bay, or I don't know how you would pronounce it, the surf park that they were talking about making out there.
Yes.
I think that they started to make moves on that fairly recently as well, or at least the news started to come up, and it started to pop up again in the feeds.
Pop up again, and I keep meaning to check with staff, like, where is that? Because I'm seeing on social media that's happening, but because we approved it so long ago, sometimes you don't keep up with it, right? You're moving on to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny in this day and age with social media and the news, you hear about it and you get excited about it. 1-2 years goes by or whatever. Next thing you know, there's, after 1 week, there's new news coming out that people are focusing on.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It happens to us too.
What else is going on that's exciting? I know the wastewater plant that's moving off of Hutchinson Island entirely, right?
Yes. This is an interesting story. The Fort Pierce Utilities Authority built that wastewater treatment plant a long time ago, and what happened was when the Navy was here, the Navy had a very primitive wastewater treatment plant there. You couldn't even call it that. It was a sewer situation. So when they left, the Navy said, "Oh, you can have it." So Fort Pierce at the time, 1945, said, "Nobody's ever going to live over there. The mosquitoes are too bad. So we'll build a sewer plant." Well, that was then, and this is now. So we're all concerned about the water and the quality of the water and the environmental protection of the water, and we're all also realizing that that's a beautiful piece of property. So it's been talked about for over 20 years to move the wastewater treatment plant. It's now happening. And the new plant is going off Selvets Road, west of Fort Pierce on Energy Lane. And it's right next to the Fort Pierce Utilities Authority's Energy Center, which is really owned by the Florida Municipal Power Agency, but we're operating for them for a short while. So we're building a new wastewater treatment plant. So we're getting that plant, and that's going to be open for operation at the end of this year at the earliest. It won't close down the island plant. It will not close down for another couple of years. They will both be operating them to make sure that we have everything operational. And so that I took a tour of the wastewater treatment, the new one, on Tuesday, and it is a village of buildings that all have their own use of what they're supposed to do, and they've built a lot of redundancy. So if things shut down, they've got backup. If there's huge growth, we've got capacity. So, and everything is built to the highest winds, the highest hurricane standards, and beyond. So it's really it's quite an impressive village of operational buildings. Really impressive.
That is nice. Do you know what they're planning to do? I mean, I'm sure it's going to take a long time as the plant on the island goes through that transition process. Is there anything that you think could be in the works for that area, or that you think you would like to see there?
Yes. As a matter of fact, again, the Fort Pierce Redevelopment Agency just got through a planning charrette process. A charrette is where you bring in people from the community and you say, what would you like to see there, in essence? And so it was a big planning process. And we planned not only for the property that the FPUA owns, but the property next to it is privately owned. It's a big piece of property where the Causeway Trailer Park used to be, privately owned. And then north of Seaway Drive is Museum Point Park, where the St. Lucie Historical Museum is, and also the aquarium. So the county said, we'd like for you to do a planning process for that too. So we had a plan, and we just had the report this week of the charrette. And it's conceptual, and nobody's tied to anything, but it just tells you what the community thinks would be a good thing to be in all those places. And on the private property, they've got a hotel, and they've got some 2- and 3-story townhouses that could be either rentals or resort or, timeshares, whatever, that kind of looks, they call it the village, and it kind of has a Key West look to it. And then on the property where the FPUA is, they have conceptualized an amphitheater and a venue spot for maybe for weddings, a place for sailing, the Treasure Coast sailing perhaps. And then, so that would be all for public use, because the land that the FPUA is on has reverter clauses in it, and it was deeded to us as long as it was for public use. Now you can debate what public use is, but and then north of it, and then another thing that they did that I really like is they have a walkway all the way around the property from Museum Point Park and Causeway Park all the way around under the Causeway Bridge, and then coming around on the FPUA Point and then along Causeway Cove. So the public can walk all the way around and have access to the water. And also on the north side, they talked about some enhancements on the north side, but not any big changes there.
That sounds really cool.
That plan is available for anybody to look at and to say, oh yeah, I like that idea. No, I don't like that idea. They have some recommendations in there. So what we did as a FPRA board is that we accepted the report. We didn't approve it or adopt it or say we're going to do exactly that, but we accepted it as a conceptual report for any guidance for the future.
That sounds really interesting. I can see how that could add to the character, kind of having that public and private land next. That almost is a good mix where you have something that's a little bit more for resident lifestyle or for people who are there, and then some that's probably a little bit more for the economic well-being or providing more creature comforts, I guess you would say.
Right. And another clever thing they did is there's a lot of property underneath the bridge that is not being used now. It might be being used that unofficially by people like to hang out or something, especially at night. So they had came up with a concept that have a plaza underneath well lit, and then also have parking underneath and have it well lit, and have a new boat ramp on the west side in addition. Because what we've heard from boaters is you can't have too many boat ramps. And every time you have to have a boat ramp, which we're all for, you have to have trailer parking, right? Yeah. Sure. You have to be able to accommodate. So it includes a lot of things. It's very exciting. Very exciting.
That is, and that's something that I think a lot of people probably aren't as privy to. You know, a lot of people, I think, look at things like King's Landing or those make the headlines, something like that. I think a lot of people watching this or listening to it might not be as privy to. I'm interested to hear if you think there's anything else that you would like people to know about that maybe people aren't aware of, or maybe they have misconceptions about.
One of the misconceptions about paid parking is that every beach park is going to be paid. Not true. Only 3, if it ever comes to fruition. So there's plenty of beaches where you can park and go to the beach for free. So that is. And I think something people may not know about that is unique to Fort Pierce is the Highwaymen Museum, because the Highwaymen artists started in Fort Pierce, and it is a story about Fort Pierce. And so we always wanted a Highwaymen Museum, but there are 26 of them in the Florida Hall of Fame, and there's about half of them left. And you couldn't always get them to agree to anything, because you can't get 26 people to agree to anything. So we finally were able to get some funding, and we took a building that we had already fixed up, the FPRA funds that had bought and fixed up, and now are converting it to a museum. And that museum will open, we hope, in June. And it will feature Highwaymen artists, both the original ones and probably the second generation. And so that in addition to art, it's a really good story about how these African American artists in the 60s and the late 50s, one, Alfred Hare, was noticed by his art teacher at Lincoln Park Academy, and at that time Fort Pierce was segregated, that he had artistic talent. So she referred him to Beanie Backus, who was our resident landscape artist, and said, help this guy learn how to paint. Well, Alfred Hare was also an entrepreneur, and he wanted to make money. I mean, he was an artist, but he was an entrepreneur. So he started painting pictures very, very fast, and now it's called Speed Landscaping School, and he got his buddies to come in. And so the story is that what it did was took these African-American artists and allowed them to make money, cash money. They sold their paintings on the side of the road or to businesses. And at that time, the only thing that they could have done in Fort Pierce was pick produce or be in the school system, maybe go to into the military. So this gave them standing, and some of the artists are better than others, but they're all paint in a unique style, and they paint these vivid colors of Florida landscapes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, that is a cool story. And I'm excited to hear. I had read that the museum was getting closer. I think that there was an announcement made towards the end of last year that they were starting to make moves. So I'm glad to hear that that's going to be, you said it'll be open by the summer?
June, we hope by June. Here's what's happened. We've had several stalls but we've taken a building that's older that was already fixed up, and when you create a museum, you need make sure that the air conditioning is the right and the security's right, because there's going to be valuable art in there, and it's just we've had a couple of hiccups, and so it's stalled it until now. We had hoped it was going to be open last January, but we're getting closer.
That's great to hear. What other things, is there anything else on the horizon that you think people can be excited about or can have on their calendar? That's something that's really interesting that we'll have to keep our tabs on.
Yeah. So one of the things that maybe people won't want to put on their calendar, but they ought to know about is, I don't know if you've been in the western part of Fort Pierce lately, but there's a whole new town growing up out there. There's a lot of new housing. There's a lot of especially in Okeechobee Road, there's all these businesses and hotels, and the old outlet mall is now completely rented to businesses. And, there's a Starbucks out there and a 7 Brew and, I don't know, Chick-fil-A and an Aldi and all kinds of things out west of town. So we realize that we need to, and maybe we're a little late to the game, have a better planning idea for that corridor, because we're calling it a jobs corridor because of many of the logistics buildings that are out there. And because we are positioned in a great place with the turnpike and I-95 and the port and the train to be a logistics kind of network. So we're working with the Economic Development Council and Fort Pierce Utilities Authority to come up with a plan for that corridor so that we can realize the maximum tax value out. Because right now our tax base is so heavily on the resident that we want more businesses in Fort Pierce, so to share the tax burden. So that whole new area out there needs some attention from the city, and we're giving it to them with the help of FBWA and the Economic Development Council.
That's great. That's great to hear. I think you're right. That's such an important place for people who, that's an important corridor for a lot of industries, and especially, as Fort Pierce really being the center point of the Treasure Coast, I can see that as a very valuable area of property. What do you think? I know we've talked at this point almost about a lot of the different areas of Fort Pierce. What do you see if you're looking, 5 years, 10 years down the line? How do you see things changing? Whether it's like on the island, the Western Corridor,
Yeah. Well, I think we're at a critical point with our citizens because a lot of people chose Fort Pierce because of its charm and its old Florida feel, small town feel, and because of the inlet and the fishing and the outdoor. And they don't want it to turn into Fort Lauderdale. And that's what you hear from people is please stop. We don't want this to be, we want Fort Pierce to stay Fort Pierce. And so I think on the island, the big challenge is going to be the people who want to put in big, tall buildings and turn in, so that this would look like how a Jupiter looks, or how the islands and further south, or whether people are going to say hold the line to because we're at a 4-story, we have an overlay district and it's 4 stories high right now. So I think that is going to be something that probably will have to be decided by our commission in the next 2 to 4 years about, do we want to go higher in terms of building, more dense in terms of buildings? And there's going to be a big push for it and a big push back against it. And we're just going to have to, make that decision. And so I think that's in terms of the island. Now, many people felt like when Kings Landing, it has one building that's 11 stories. Mm-hmm. And many people said, oh my gosh, this is going to turn into Fort Lauderdale. You got this tall building in downtown Fort Pierce. And downtown Fort Pierce has no building height restriction. So there's nothing to overcome except public sentiment. But I will say that I've been over to Fort Myers, which is a town similar to us, a little bit more upscale, but similar. Marina at the waterfront, a Marriott hotel, 12 stories at the waterfront. And you look around the downtown Fort Myers, and there's very, very few other tall buildings. Very few. It's Fort Myers has kept its character. They have the museum, the Edison Museum, and the Ford Museum, and they've kept their downtown character. So I don't see that Kings Landing being 11 stories means that we're going to turn into a city that has canyons and tall buildings, and I just don't see that. But yeah, there is that pushback.
Yeah, that's the balance I think a lot of Treasure Coast cities are feeling right now. A lot of us that are north of Jupiter, really. I mean, Stewart's facing it right now. Jensen Beach has had its own little pushbacks. Of course, Port St. Lucie's been growing like crazy. Sebastian and Vero, to an extent, are experiencing that in a lot of areas, where it's how do you, and I think it is different with somewhere like Fort Pierce, where you do have a very unique charm to it. I live in Jensen Beach. That's part of kind of their, that eclectic kind of old Florida feel.
Yeah. I love that little old part of the beach. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the balance, really. It's like, how do you maintain your character while also, having newer amenities, or, allowing developers to put in certain things that may benefit the lifestyle of people, and what are the pros and cons? I mean, it's like you said, there's always going to be, benefits, there's going to be people pushing for it and pushing against it. How do you balance that? And that's not a position that I envy, but that's why you're there to make those.
Looking forward to that. Because you're going to have to come down on one side or the other. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it, but because I can see, it's one of those things where you can see positives on both sides. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that old Fort Pierce wants us to stay the same, even though they want better tax base. We all do. But even newer people come and go, wait, I'm here now. I chose it. I want it to stay that. I don't want it to change, So even newer people don't want it to change. I chose it for this reason. Don't change,
Yeah. That's, you don't want to be the people who bought on, people that went and they moved to Palm Beach or South Beach or Fort Lauderdale, and next thing you know, you blink your eye, you look around, and it's a totally different animal than what you originally bought into when you fell in love with it.
Yes. And we all know that people have been moving to Florida for decades to retire. I mean, that has always been the Florida thing. Mm-hmm. But somehow COVID created the mass migration of people to Florida, because you had to work remote anyway, and there are a whole bunch of other reasons. And all of a sudden, Florida has more people than Florida was ever meant to hold, honestly. And so that's why we have flooding. That's why we need resilience. That's why we know, the rising seas, and it's not any longer flooding that you have to worry about on the coast. You have to worry about it throughout Florida because we're just overbuilt, period, for what the land was originally.
Yeah. And as soon as you get people moving, then you've got service businesses that accommodate them. You've got their friends and family that want to come visit, especially during season. And it's kind of this cycle.
Yes. Yes.
What do you think? What are your, just because we're kind of coming up on 30 minutes and I wanted to get your thoughts on just on like a personal level, what are some areas of Fort Pierce that you like to frequent? What are some events, restaurants, things that you like to do on a personal level that I think that would be interesting to people?
Well, I'm on the board of the farmers market. So full disclosure, I think the farmers market in downtown Fort Pierce is one of the best ways to spend your Saturday morning. I mean, we call it a Saturday morning tradition. And many people think that the craft market is part of the farmers market, but the craft market is a totally different market. And that's really crafts and our farmers market. We try to keep it farmers specific, and things that are made in Florida are made or grown or fished, right? We try to keep it as close to a pure farmers market as possible. So Saturday morning farmers market, not to be missed. Sunrise Theater, love the Sunrise Theater. The programming is diverse. They're doing a great job with the Sunrise Theater, and we support that financially. We're trying to have a little bit of a new operational plan, but we know that the Sunrise Theater is an economic engine for downtown Fort Pierce. It's very important. Restaurants are springing up all over, and I try to get to them as quickly as I can, although I'm not, because I'm a widow, I don't do a whole lot of, dining out and going out a lot. But I'm interested in new businesses and having them succeed. The new Bluebird Cafe on Delaware has really kind of livened things up. And Delaware Avenue is an improved street for a lot of reasons, including the Bluebird Cafe, which I'm looking forward to going to. I haven't made it yet, but I want to do that soon. A lot of new places on the island to eat and shop, and downtown shopping has improved. There's retail downtown, and of course the microbreweries are fun. The Sailfish and Pierce Cider, lots of fun in the downtown area, and then the Kmart shopping centers is now kind of going to have some really interesting stores in it. And people have, since I've been mayor, one of the things that people say to me is, why can't I shop at Target? I don't have a Target in Fort Pierce. Well, these big box stores, they have to determine where their market is. And I say they go where the money is. And they look at Fort Pierce and say, you don't have a lot of discretionary money yet. So we might be getting there.
That's interesting. And you mentioned Bluebird. We've had that a lot across our Fort Pierce Facebook group, and it looks really, really cool. Right. You can tell they did a good job, and that family has quite a history in the city. So that's always nice to see when you've got local
talent.
people.
I mean, Daryl has great talent and in music, and he's an interesting person. And Gina is a baker, and they're just an interesting couple and they've taken their talents and put it in this cafe, and I hope they're successful.
Yeah, so do I. That's always a really cool thing to see. Yeah. And before we wrap up, because you had mentioned the farmers market, it kind of reminded me they're going to be redoing the square there, right? Is that
eventually?
Yes. That's not something it's not something that you're going to expect anytime soon.
No, okay. We're right now talking about concepts, right?
Cool.
But we're going to keep that, at least as far as I'm concerned, we're going to keep that space down there for events, because that's where Friday Fest is held too. I forgot to mention Friday Fest in the main streets, and So Friday Fest is a big popular event and well attended. So and Main Street does a lot for Fort Pierce in terms of events like the July the 4th fireworks and New Year's fireworks, and also the parade at Sights and Sound parades at the holiday time. So we've got a lot of community involvement, and that brings the whole community downtown.
That's awesome to hear. Where can people go to get some updated information on things that are happening in Fort Pierce? I know you guys you'll do a lot on Facebook as far as posting it. Do you have like an email chain, or where can people go to get accurate, up-to-date information on what's going on in the city?
So of course, our City of Fort Pierce website is one, and we have a calendar on there. And of course, nobody's calendar is complete, because there are events going on that people don't go through you or tell you about. They just, they do. But Main Street Fort Pierce has a calendar too, and you can know what's going on in terms of Main Street. But honestly, watching our social media pages and just watching social media, period, is a good way to do it. St. Lucie County also, because St. Lucie County, like, we have job fairs. We have job fair, and it's the county and the city and Career Source, and it's a lot of us together collaborating on many of these events. That's
great. Well, we'll include links to some of these when we post this.
Okay.
And I appreciate you. I appreciate. It was really an awesome time talking to you. I really appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it was nice meeting you, Josh.
Likewise, Mayor Hudson.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.